the one and only Milo, former top editor at Breitbart and now a author, entertainer extraordinaire, social justice warrior extinguisher. I came up with that just now. Milo, good morning. How are you?
Morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. So first of all, congratulations
It's a
on...
new thing for me. I'm not allowed to call you boss anymore. I used to call you morning boss on the radio, but morning sir is going to have to do that.
I want you to, because I know it'll turn into a breathless hit piece on BuzzFeed or the Daily Beast or both that no one will care about. Because
funny that
those of you who have Google available to you, you can see exactly what Milo and I are talking about if you do some clever Googling. But the media trying to shocked that Milo is allowed on our radio show, and we're covering him at Breitbart News. But it's hard not to cover you, Milo, because you're at number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list, and you did this after every publishing house in New York basically refused to publish your book, Dangerous, which is a must-reading for anyone under 110 on the right side of the aisle or on the left side of the aisle. You guys really should read it. It's a thoughtful book. It's an important book. And Milo...
Or over 110, I'm obliged to say.
Well, at that point, you'll just have to get the audiobook. I mean, I don't think you have to...
Very good,
Is that out yet, by the way? Because I'm looking forward to that.
Well, thank you for asking. It's finished now, so I finished laying it down. I think that it's been edited up to the penultimate chapter, and then they have to do some remastering and whatnot. By the end of the month, certainly we'll have the date when it comes out. I know there's a lot of anticipation for that because people love to read when they're driving to work or doing whatever it is. So it should be fun actually. It's a slightly different product to the book in the sense that it's a performance, and I've tried to deliver it like I do one of my college talks. So people who didn't get to see one of those, or who aren't going to come to the tour next year, or whatever, get to sort of hear how I deliver something live. It's not just a sort of dull, crisp read in a darkened room. So I think people are going to really like it.
Well, I wasn't going to have you back on the show this soon, but I read so many hit pieces on the last time you were on the show on BuzzFeed and Daily Beast, and that I had to double down and have you back. And part of this, and everyone knows who listens regularly that that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but not entirely so, because you've undergone somewhat of a blacklist. I have not caught you on any of the major cable news networks, including the conservative one, Fox. That somehow you've a number 2 best-selling book on the New York Times list, and you know that they will do, because they're very cagey with their algorithm, that you know that it has to be a big seller for it to get to that level. You've stayed on the list. I think you're number 5 again this week, so 2 weeks in a row, and I think it could even go up as people realize that there has been a calculated effort to suppress discussion of the book. We're seeing that your posters around New York City vandalized. I had eyewitnesses reaching out to me and saying, hey, there was a Milo billboard at my bus stop. It's been destroyed. And yet this is not being covered. And even when you do manage to pull off a establishment media interview, like you did with NPR a week or 2 ago, they are refusing to post the interview. They won't even post clips of the interview. And in fact, when Breitbart wrote it up, NPR sent me email saying I need to correct it, because claiming the interview wasn't actually with NPR, even though there were photos of you that you've sent to me. You could watch the video. You're talking into an NPR microphone for 40 minutes. And they're trying to claim to me this is not an NPR interview, as if I'm some sort of an idiot. It's what's going on here, Milo? How come people are boycotting this book? How come people are really treating this as you're not entitled to say what you have to say?
I think that Breitbart readers and listeners will remember well what they went through during the last election, the names they were called by the left, the lies that were told about their candidate as he was just trying to express a different vision for what America should look like. Stick up for the borders, stick up for American workers. And if you express views that threaten that sort of left-wing, politically correct globalist worldview, you're going to come in for viciousness and for clever, cunning, strategic attempts to destroy you like you would never imagine. And I used to, not to give too much praise to old school Republicans, but I used to laugh slightly when conservatives in America would say how difficult it was to get a book off the ground or to have a successful media career as a Republican, as a conservative. But launching this book, I've realized they were right. And I think the left hates me even more than it hates any of those guys, because Barnes & Noble, will not stock the book. And our distributor has told us in writing explicitly that decision is almost certainly political. It's an incredible thing. It's number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list, and Barnes & Noble won't put it in their stores. It's been out of stock everywhere for weeks, and at some point you have to ask why these retailers aren't ordering enough copies for their own customers. Why aren't they ordering enough copies? We've had tens of thousands sitting in warehouses of retailers that just weren't processed. And these things pile up after a while.
Yeah,
after a while...
Hold on, Milo, because I want to focus on one part, because I want to go next to this issue with retailers not being able, Amazon not getting the books, being sold out, like Amazon sells out of top best-selling books, which is just unfathomable to me, unless, of course, you're a conservative, when we know Amazon is run by globalists. But let's take this in for a second. You have a one-man marketing machine with a proven audience, and yet you could not get a mainstream publishing house in all of New York to be able to publish a book they knew would be a bestseller. That is the state of American publishing. That is the state of the American left, the arts and culture. And it is indirectly and probably inadvertently proves the entire point of your book, the fact that you had to create your own label to publish it, and then now you're struggling to get it distributed, and it's still a number 2 bestseller anyway. The phone line's 866-95-PATRIOT. If you got a call for Milo, give us a buzz. Now, Milo, walk us through what's going on with Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the distributors, because there's something fishy here, because I've seen the book, quote-unquote, sold out at Amazon over and over again. What the heck does that mean?
Well, we're not in control of how many copies they order. And Amazon sort of, will order as many copies as what they tell us is as the algorithm says they should. Well, the problem is clearly there's an issue when their number 1 best-selling book, as dangerous has been for quite a while on several occasions, isn't being ordered, isn't being processed, and isn't being shipped out to customers. And as far as we can tell, Amazon didn't order enough books even to cover the paid pre-orders they'd already received, and nobody's able to tell us why. And there comes a point at which the coincidences and the frustrations, not just with Amazon, but with everybody, every bit of the chain start to pile up, and you think, maybe people really do want this book to fail. The Nielsen that does the book scan numbers reports the number of hardcovers sold. Now, we know that we have shipped out, and not just to wholesalers on a sale or return basis, but for firm paid orders, we know that we have shipped out 100,000 books. Our entire first printing is gone. But the Nielsen book scan numbers today only show 30,000 sales. Well, I don't know whether it's because they haven't been reported yet, or whether there's a delay, or what's going on. And my CEO is frantically calling around trying to find out. Our distributor says the numbers are inexplicable, and he's never seen anything like it before. This book has become, in a way that most people would never realize and only see, because it's out of stock everywhere, they think it's doing really well and we can't print enough. That's only half the story. This book has become something that there are active machinations, around. People are trying to destroy it. And, you go to Barnes & Noble to try and order it, and on occasion, I've had people write to me and say, I went to go and order your book in Barnes & Noble, and they refused to order it, saying that we will not carry hate speech. Barnes & Noble have, whatever hate speech means, Barnes & Noble have thousands of these things in their warehouses, but they refuse to put it in stores, I suspect because they're worried about the behavior of their own employees. So it's just
wow, that's an interesting theory, and I hadn't thought of that, but of course that makes perfect sense, and I know this has been a contentious issue.
Are sensible, but the people on the front lines, the people on $23K a year, frustrated English literature graduates from, terrible left-wing universities, what are they going to do when my book pops up in their stores? Well, of course they're going to hide it. They're going to sneak it away. They're going to, I'm sure the people up top of Barnes & Noble are just thinking, how can we control our own employees? And their answer has been, let's not put it in stores because it will cause too much hell for us with our own people, and let's just make everyone special order it. But the consequence, of course, is to depress book sales and to make the book much more difficult to get hold of for Barnes & Noble's own customers.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening. And I know that I've had people go and request the book from Barnes & Noble, and not surprisingly to anyone who listens to this show, that the managers of the stores, particularly in left-wing cities, are gleeful when they declare that they are not going to be carrying the book, literally using their power as a major bookseller to suppress the proliferation of your ideas, Milo. So why are you too dangerous for Barnes & Noble?
Well, here's the funny thing. If you actually read the book, there's nothing in there that's particularly outrageous or shocking. It's not as shocking as some of my college talks. It's not as outrageous as some of the jokes that I tell in media interviews. The book is actually me at my most substantial and serious, and maybe that's why they're scared of it, and maybe that's why they don't like it. The other explanation, of course, is they simply haven't read it. They believe the headlines, about any conservative in public life in America will get called all kinds of names. Our former colleague, Steve, who is now the president's chief advisor, was called the most disgusting things on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, and no one's ever apologized for any of it. This is just part and parcel of being conservative in public life. And nobody actually goes back and reads anything that Steve Bannon has written. Nobody ever goes back and listens to his hundreds of hours of Breitbart News daily. They just accept that he's this, he's that, he's whatever, because Vox or Mike or Gawker said so. So I think it's a combination of malevolence and ignorance, neither of which are acceptable when you're in a business situation and your customers really want something. But the book itself, I hope that your listeners will take the time to read it. Buying one has become an act of defiance against the establishment, left and right. It's the best way you have since the election, I guess, is sticking two fingers up at the establishment and saying, no, you're doing everything possible to keep this out of my hands, which is precisely why I'm going to read it. It's acquired at least a sort of cachet and a kind of countercultural cool because everybody wants to keep it out of your hands. But the book itself is quite serious. And, of course, it has jokes in it, and everybody says that they love it, and I'm very grateful for how many good reviews it's had. But the book's actually really serious. It talks about, the globalism and the immigration stuff, but it focuses really on free expression and freedom of speech and the right of Americans to be, do, and say anything they want, and how important the First Amendment is, and who the real threats to the First Amendment are, whether it's feminists or Black Lives Matter or university professors or Hollywood producers, all of the people in America who are dedicated to the destruction of your freedoms. And I think because I take aim at so many of them, the book has, by virtue of existing, created a lot of enemies dedicated to destroying it.
All right, Milo is our guest. The book Dangerous, out now, New York Times bestseller, despite efforts to stifle information about the book and perhaps even sales, which we're investigating actively at Breitbart News and elsewhere. So, Milo, keep us posted on that. And some of you are calling in to talk to Milo. I've got some questions for him, but I want to get the listeners of this audience involved. So let's go to Frank in New York, line 3. Frank, you're on with Alex and Milo. Good morning.
Hey, Milo. I got to commend you on your pushback against the liberal media. And I think that the Republicans, the conservatives, and the people of this country, even myself, who is a Trump supporter, was afraid to say anything in public. But now, after seeing you and many others, I am really sick and tired of the liberals out there thinking that they can get their way. And I appreciate everything you've done. I've learned from you and watched your interviews. But I am now speaking intelligently and not in any volatile way, that my beliefs of being a conservative and supporting our President Trump. So thank you for that. And secondly, I'd like to simply know, how come we don't just repeal Obamacare first and then rebuild the whole system from there? That's my question. That's my comment.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words. I think that I think this is the NPR interview that they refused to air, that you can find on Breitbart.com, and you can find it on YouTube. I said I don't want everybody to behave like I do, because it'd be pretty chaotic if everybody was going around being a hellraiser like me. But it's important that some people do it. It's important that Trump, for instance, that's why I like his tweets, not just because they annoy people, though that does give me pleasure too, but because he opens up space behind him for other people to express themselves 10, 20% more than they otherwise would have. And you seem to be a perfect example of that, sir, so thank you for that. I'm going to let Alex speak about the Obamacare thing, because he's much more an expert on that than I am. But thank you for the compliment. And I think it's really important that, that we support figures who push the boundaries of what can be thought and said, particularly when there are so many pressures from all sides, whether it's from college professors or the media or Hollywood or the government are, so many pressures on what we can say, and the boundaries of acceptable thought and speech are so narrow these days, which they are in America. This book's an attempt to explain why that's dangerous and why that's why that threatens democracy and threatens people's right to self-expression. So thank you for that, and I'll keep up the fight.
Yeah, and we'll come back to Obamacare talk because we can do that. We can do that a lot at any point. But we have Milo, and I want you guys to be able to speak to him. So let's have Alex in New Jersey on line 5. Alex makes a very important point, I believe. Alex, you're on the show. Welcome.
Well, good morning, Alex, and good morning, Milo. I was sitting in traffic on the Garden State Parkway, and I just went on Barnes & Noble's website. You can buy Mein Kampf on barnesandnoble.com, but they won't carry possibly the greatest book written in the 21st century, in my opinion. I have a copy. I am reading it. I will then be buying a copy for my brother because I don't want to just give Milo only money for one book. What a fantastic series.
Alex, so much to respond to. I'll start and then I'll kick it to Milo. First of all, I do recommend you pick up copies for social justice warriors in your life, for your children, for your parents. Just it's something that's accessible to pretty much any audience, teenage and up. There's a couple of dirty jokes in there, so if you think it's inappropriate, wait till your kid's a little older. But it is pretty accessible for all audiences. But the point about Mein Kampf is exactly, Milo, why you and I are so big into free speech, because once you start the slippery slope of is Milo's ideas unsayable, then how come the ideas of Adolf Hitler are sayable? Like, why is that? And then all of a sudden you're tripping over yourself trying to figure out which end is up.
Well, you realize that it's not actually about ideas at all. You realize that the reason they hate me is that I'm alive and effective. Mm-hmm. And they want to shut me up because Adolf Hitler is no longer capable of inspiring, huge numbers of people to do terrible things in their view, and in everyone else's view, of course, historically. But I am alive and I am capable of people doing terrible things in their view, which are voting Republican or not agreeing with, clamping down on free speech. So there's obviously nothing in common between the two authors and the two books. But the difference is I'm alive and I'm effective. And Simon & Schuster publishes mob bosses and mob lawyers, people who have killed people and people who have stood in court defending people who have killed people. They do it because these books sell. But they won't publish a conservative who has too many fans. And other publishers are too skittish about it too. And the entire liberal media establishment and publishing industry are dedicated to suffocating this book, because I'm alive and because I'm effective. And that's the difference. And when you realize it's not really about the content of the book at all, because none of them have read it, it starts to make more sense.
Yeah, and you're reaching a new group of people that has not been touched by the Fox Newses of the world, and in large part talk radio. And I say this as a talk show host and someone who loves talk radio and believes in the medium. I mean, you have to be able to expand beyond talk radio and Fox News, or else what good is all the good we've done in the last few years with this Trump revolution? Okay, Milo, so I got a couple of questions for you. There's still many more on the phone, but I want to talk about some of the big themes of the book. We've kind of touched on free speech, but yesterday you made an interesting move. Ben Shapiro was banned from Berkeley. Anyone could have seen that coming, given what happened to you, given what happened to Ann Coulter. That's barely news. What is news is you and Ben don't get along well. Ben has made it somewhat of a life's mission to try to undermine Breitbart News and attack us for a variety of things, even though I think we get a lot of credit for Ben's rise, which is unfortunate because Ben and I got along. We're friends for so many years. But this was an interesting move that you went out and invited him to your free speech week at Berkeley. Let's bury the hatchet and let's go for something bigger than our petty Twitter war and come together to fight the institutional left and for free speech. Why'd you do this? What gave you the idea?
Well, I think something that people often don't expect when American public life is so tribal and consumed with petty rivalries and obsessed with, sticking up for the other side at all costs, particularly on the left, which defends its own bad actors all the time, insulates them from criticism. It just struck me as immediately obvious that if UC Berkeley was going to deploy some of the same slippery, slimy tactics to stop yet another conservative speaker after Ann Coulter and I had both failed to successfully deliver our talks, that there was only one morally right thing to do, which was to express support and offer help, because it doesn't matter the fact that, I happen to think that Ben went completely crazy over Trump. And I think he's still crazy. I don't agree with, half the stuff he says. And I don't like the way that he's treated some of my friends. And I don't care for the guy. But he's a respectable, mainstream conservative commentator with a large audience. And UC Berkeley is trying to stop him from speaking. And that's bigger than any of us. That's bigger than any of our feuds and any of our grievances. So I know that he's not going to accept the invitation, but I did invite him to come and speak at Berkeley Free Speech Week, which is a free speech festival I'm planning in September, as a way to get him on a platform somewhere somehow. And it just struck me as obviously the right thing to do, and obviously the right move to make, because conservatives, haven't always had the moral high ground on all subjects. But when it comes to free speech, we do. And I think that we should act accordingly.
Yeah, and this is a key point. Milo, the author of Dangerous, is my guest. Last topic for the day is Islam, which is another place where I think you have the moral high ground, and it really exposed the left for their stupidity and hypocrisy. And earlier in the segment, and for those of you just tuning in, pick up the shows on demand, commercial-free. You can listen on that app, download it, listen off the grid. We spoke about female genital mutilation, which is on the rise in the United States. There's a probe in not just Detroit now, but now it's moved to Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York to see how widespread this is. This does not preoccupy American feminism. The mythical gender pay gap does. And you've been the one who has been perhaps the most articulate critic on a mainstream level that's out there, talking about how if you're gay, if you're a woman, then the issue isn't Donald Trump. The issue is encroaching Sharia supremacism, and Islam. And let's talk about it, Milo.
Well, it seems to me completely obvious that Donald Trump is clearly, on the facts alone, to strip out the outraged rhetoric, the most gay-friendly person ever to run for president, the most gay-friendly person ever to be president. And, here's the difference between me and I think conservative gays and gays on the left. We don't care about being pandered to. We want somebody who's actually going to do something. So we don't care if the White House issues some gushing proclamation about gay pride. Who cares? Gay pride now is not really a celebration of defiant gays against the odds. It's just a far left-wing, heavily corporatized festival of drugs and sex. And for some of us, that's not our thing. We don't like the politics. We don't like, the fact that Chase now sponsors it. It doesn't really seem fun or interesting or dissident or mischievous, and what people actually get up to there is not to our taste. So, the fact that the White House doesn't mark gay pride, it doesn't affect us at all. But what does affect us is Donald Trump sticking up for women and gays and the rest of the country by taking a hard line on radical Islam. And that's actually, if you look at the real facts, divorced from the rhetoric and the noise and the fluff, it's perfectly obvious who gays should support. Should they support, Hillary, the left, the candidates funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, where gays are thrown off roofs and countries that support, ISIS and whatever? Or should they support the guy who's going to restrict Muslim immigration and save gay lives as a result and stop things like the Pulse nightclub shooting happening by more carefully policing Muslims at home? It's pretty obvious to me, and it's one of the examples in the book where I say that this has become, it's gone beyond an unpopular opinion into what the left would characterize as hate speech, and indeed they characterize Trump's attempts to keep America safer as hateful. That's absurd. And this whole invention of hate speech, this concept, which doesn't exist in the Supreme Court, that can't figure out what the hell they mean by it either, it's just a way of saying, I don't like your opinion. I don't have any facts to refute it. I can't really argue the merits, so I'm going to say that you're a bad person and not go into any more detail to shut you up and to make sure that you don't get on TV. That's not good enough anymore. And people expressed that they don't think it's good enough anymore either by putting Trump in the White House, by buying my book, and by expressing themselves, by becoming Breitbart readers. I mean, Breitbart has exploded in popularity in the last couple of years because, for a long time, it sort of toiled as one of the smaller conservative publications, constantly keeping a check on the media, holding their feet to the fire, and then suddenly it's like the country woke up, and there was this moment, this break, this preference cascade, they call it in sociology, where everyone suddenly went, you know what, we are sick of being told what to do, and we are sick of being lied to, and we would quite like to operate according to facts reason and logic, and not according to the outrage as dictated by the progressive left. And Islam is, the single greatest threat to the Western way of life, to Western civilization. It's an existential threat to gay people, and it's a threat to women, and all of the things that the left claims they love, Islam threatens. And yet they pander to it, they mollycoddle it, and they do whatever it takes to excuse both the faith and its followers from all of the appalling things done in the name of Allah. And that to any gay person with two brain cells to rub together is hypocritical, but also horrifying, because it means that those people who we kind of trust to keep an eye on things and to advocate for the rights of various groups are not just failing in their duty, but are actively working against us now. And the progressive left is acting in direct contradiction and directly against the interests of women and gays and all of the people that they used to fight for, and even blacks who by wanting untrammeled immigration from Hispanic countries, driving wages down in black communities that really need some support and some and really need good decent jobs, and are now being undercut by the Hispanic immigration. In almost every respect, the progressive left is actively working to destroy the lives of the people it claims to support.
And this is why, Milo, this is why people are actively trying to suppress and destroy you, because you get it and you articulate it clearly and concisely. Tough to argue with this stuff.